Greetings, this is Chris McIlrath speaking to you from East Timor. The reason I'm speaking to you is really about whether you want to live on as a species, as a human species, or whether we just continue the way we're going towards extinction. I start with a little summary of the current situation as concluded by many thousands of independent scientists around the world and other observers. And then we'll go, in a few minutes, we'll go into the solutions, what can be done. So just to give an example of the current situation of management, the current style of management which the corporations force onto the people through the government. Jails. Now, I studied law in 1996 at Southern Cross University, a reasonable university in Australia. And one of the things we studied was recidivism. And it was clearly shown that the normal recidivism is about 85%, meaning that 85% of people who go to jail for stealing cars or robbing banks or whatever they went to jail for, they go back to jail after being jailed and being released. They go back to jail for the same crime about 85% of the time. However, we discovered that there was a different system where you don't run the jails with the prisoners behind bars and the wardens and so on wandering up and down laughing at the prisoners, but you have a different system where they all live together in the same building. It might be downtown, but it's a kind of an office block type of building where you can't get in or out without authorization. But once you're in, there's very little to distinguish the prisoners from the warden, certainly nothing obvious. So people wander around, live their lives amongst people who are not criminals. And in this situation, there is a recidivism of 15% instead of 85%. So that's a 70% reduction in people going back to jail for the same crime. Well, of course, that's completely unacceptable as a business model, because you want, if you're running prisons, you want to have as many clients as possible. However, one would think, that the jails are run by the government, and the government really has the best for the community at heart. But that clearly is not the case with prisons. And if you look at many other things, the poisons in food, water, air, and the sea, that also shows that the government does not have the well-being of the general population anywhere in the list of priorities at all, only for public relations type exercises. They say that they care about the people, but clearly their actions show without any doubt that they are beholden to the corporations and not to the people. Wars is another great example where the wars are always driven by the armaments companies. They create the reasons for a war, almost always, quite falsely. They have these things called a false flag operation, where they make it look like a certain party has, or a certain country has done something, which in fact is not the case. It was the perpetrators of the war that have done this. And they're able to get away with all this because the armaments companies are not only in bed with the main media companies and mainstream media, but they're usually owned directly or indirectly by those same media companies. You may think that that's a conspiracy theory, but just look at who owns NBC in America, who owns ABC in America, and you'll find that two of the biggest armaments manufacturers on the planet own both those companies. NBC is owned by General Electric. Westinghouse owns ABC. And Westinghouse, of course, is not limited to armaments manufacturers. They make nuclear bombs and they also make the nuclear power stations which generate the raw materials for the bombs. So this is not in the general best interests of the people. They're quite the opposite, because it's been known since 1942 that 1/1,000,000th of a gram of uranium is fatal to humans. And yet they do things like dump 120,000 times more radiation than was generated by the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombs on Iraq. That was just up until 2005, in the form of bullets and bombs, the projectiles. The tank rounds are 10 pounds of solid 99.6% uranium. They call it depleted uranium, which sounds very nice, but actually it's only depleted by 0.4%, and it's that 0.4 which is the material they use to make the nuclear bombs. So clearly that's not in the interest of life on Earth. Now we have the money system, also created not for the benefit of the people, but created for the benefit of those who create the money system. The banks create unlimited credit from nothing, and that's a direct quote from the Australian Reserve Bank to me. The official economic spokesperson for the economic research branch of the Reserve Bank said to me verbatim, "There is no limit to the amount of credit the trading banks can create from nothing." So that led to some researchers, including myself and Dudley Leggett and Jeremy Lee, writing up a one-page document entitled "No Tax." And I showed that to one of the most senior people in the federal government at the time, Senator Derry Jones, supposedly the third most powerful person in the government at the time. He stated, yes, that would work, but the establishment would never wear it. And I said to him, "Are you telling me the banks control the government?" And he looked me directly in the eye, and when I'm sitting on the other side of his coffee table in his electoral office, his senator's office in Toowong in Brisbane in Queensland, Australia, and he said, yes. No, there's no equivocation whatsoever. The banks control the government. So that's what we have at the moment, and it gets worse. Stay with me, folks. Buckle up. Now, 5G is a system of electromagnetic radiation which they use for mobile phones, but it's not only used for mobile phones. It's actually a military weapon, easily findable if you look up www.znews.tv. You'll see several videos there which will prove to you beyond any doubt that 5G is a military weapon. And it's being pushed out with zero, we're talking absolutely no research whatsoever done by the companies putting it out regarding the any possible health impacts, any damage to people's health from that huge quantity of military radiation. Although there's tens of thousands of studies showing how harmful it is. So that's 5G. And one professor, Paul, I believe, emeritus professor from a university in America, states that within a few months of putting out 5G, people will be unable to think. You might want to give that a ponder for a second. People will be unable to think after a few months of 5G being put out, including on 20,000 satellites pumping it out, so there'll be very little way to escape being irradiated by this tremendously damaging electromagnetic radiation. So we've got the politics and the government clearly owned by the corporations. You can do your own research, but I've given a brief summary of that. And those corporations are clearly run by the most criminally insane people on this planet. You can think that's a conspiracy theory, but who would be doing that stupendously damaging things to life on Earth? 60% less birds, fish, and mammals than there were 60 years ago. human reproductive capacity is 60% lower than it was 40 or 50 years ago, and on the decline. The humans will be unable to reproduce at the current rate in 70 years from now. I'm speaking to you in September 2019. So within the life of our children or our grandchildren, humans will be unable to reproduce. So where to from here? We have two choices. Number one choice, look forward to extinction if we continue being ruled by the few who are clearly mentally ill in the worst possible way. Or choice number two is that we, the many, design and implement systems which are good for our health and our well-being and our happiness. These are the two choices. Now, which of these do you choose? What is your choice? Who will you support? Where do you stand? This is Chris McIlrath signing off from znews.tv, www.znews.tv. And if you wish to communicate with me, you can do so at chris@znews.tv, chris@znews.tv, or chris@znews.tv. Thank you very much.